The movie starts and we see an old castle. We see two guards pulling out a chest from the water under the castle. They take it to the bridge, and we see an old bald man, Lord Richard, with a middle-aged servant, Mistress Blythe, and a young priest, Isaac, coming towards the guards. Richard asks the guards to open the chest, and they see two obvious bodies of little children, decayed and swarmed with maggots. They get disgusted, and the guards close the lid. We see Blythe coming to Richard's room to talk with him. She tells him that the Queen didn't take the news well. Richard says that he's not surprised. The bodies are enough to drive her mad. Blythe tells him that they need to tell her the grim details. They are her blood, and Richard asks how she's so sure that they are the lost princes. Blythe tells him that the princes have been missing for weeks now, long enough to decay like the remains they found in the castle grounds. It's very clear that it's them, just unclear who's to blame. Richard looks a little stressed. He asks if she's suspecting something, and Blythe says they didn't lock themselves in that chest. She tries to leave the room, after saying she'll go tend to their queen, but Richard grabs her arm and tells her to not poison her mind with her suspicions. Blythe looks down on him and pulls her arms back, telling him that he's not their king, and gets out. We see her trying to comfort the queen, Elizabeth, who looks devastated and cries nonstop. Blythe tells her that their enemies took the opportunity to attack them when King Edward is weak, but she tells her to not worry, her allegiance will always be to her. She gets up and tells the young servant, Geoffrey, to stay with her tonight, before going out. We see the priest sitting in front of the stairs and praying, when a piece of metal falls down in front of him from the stairs. He looks around. He hears a sound and goes to look around the door. He sees Geoffrey. He gets too close to the priest, and tells him that Richard has called a meeting and he's expected. Geoffrey stops Isaac as he was about to go, and tells him to be careful, he has an awful feeling. Isaac asks him to wait for him here, and tells him he'll be back soon. We see Richard in a room with the others, and the bodies of the princes on the table. He says he'll inform the king about their discovery. Blythe says the queen wants a formal burial for the young princes tomorrow, and Richard turns to Isaac. He says he'll see to it, and Richard says they must spread the news of this throughout the land and find out who's responsible. Blythe says the culprit can't be that far away from them, since the kids barely left the castle, and Richard says that they will start with the merciless questioning of their staff. He tells Solomon, a lanky servant, to prepare the torture chamber. Solomon gets excited and goes out while playing with a torture tool in his hand. Richard says they will not rest until they find out who did it. We see the guards bringing a big, unkempt-looking man, Bartholomew, to the castle. Richard sees them on the bridge and starts talking to the man. Bartholomew teases him, and Richard gets angry at this. He tells the guards to take him to the dungeon, and they take him inside of the castle. Bartholomew continues to yell, threaten, and damn everyone. Isaac comes and starts praying in front of him. Bartholomew spits blood on his face and tells him that this is nonsense. The guards take him away, and Richard kicks Isaac's foot and tells him to get up. The thing's ramblings just madden them all. We see the guards locking Bartholomew in a cell and going away. He starts yelling, but then hears the sound of a child. He starts looking around, and sees Blythe in front of the cell when he turns back around. She tells him that she doesn't think that he caused the demise of the young princes, and asks him who made him confess to it. She scares him, talking about the tortures they will inflict on him, that she can offer a way out for him, and offers him a deal. Bartholomew agrees and tells her to come closer. Blythe gives him her knife in return for that information, and leaves. We see a noble blonde young woman, Joan, welcoming a man whom everyone talks about, Henry, to their house that she lives in with her dad. Henry sits down, and Joan asks if the rumors about him are true. Henry says he wishes they were untrue when they talk. Henry tells them his wife has passed, but she's not gone, and seeing loved ones in their afterlife is a curse, but his son William is worth every nightmare. The father says that he wants to speak to his wife, Mary, one last time. Henry asks if they have something that belongs to her, and they give him a necklace of hers. He turns the hourglass next to him, explaining to him that they can only ask questions until it ends, or as long as he can dare to stay in the realm of the ghosts. He takes a candle from the table and tells her to begin. He changes his realm, and we see him in the same house but alone, darker, and with a blue tint. He starts calling for Mary, and she shows up behind him. He looks from the corner of his eye and sees a non-human-looking, decaying creature. He tells her to stay in the dark and don't come close to him. He lies, and tells the family that she's looking like an angel. He tells the family the opposite of her answers, changes them to good ones instead of painful, harsh words. The spirit tells him that she's actually here for him. The spirits can see what's awaiting the living, and she warns him not to go to the Tower of London. Henry says he's not planning to go there, and Mary says he'll be drawn to it. Henry suddenly turns around to look at Mary's face. She got closer to him while talking, and he sees her distorted, half-missing face. He throws himself to the ground and apologizes from the family, saying it doesn't usually end like this. Joan helps him get up and takes him to her room to rest on her bed, since he's shaking. Henry gives the necklace back to her and gets inside. Then we see Isaac going down to the torture chamber, and seeing Solomon torturing a man who's naked and hanged to the ceiling from his feet. He can't bear to look at it and turns around to go back. He sees Blythe when he gets out, and they start talking. She asks him if it's okay to use ungodly means to help someone, and would God forgive them if they did something like this. Isaac says the answer is already in the question, and Blythe tells him why she's doing that. She tells him that she heard a rumor about a man who can speak to ghosts. She's planning to find him, and ask the princes who did it. Isaac tells her that he's not approving this, but her secret is safe with him. Blythe tells him that she's leaving the Queen under his and Jeffrey's protection, and asks him to promise there will be no harm done to the Queen while she's away. She tells him that he knows Jeffrey very well. She implies that she knows their relationship, and tells him that their secret is safe with her, just like her secret is safe with him. Isaac says the Queen will be looked after, and Blythe leaves. We see Bartholomew in his cell, singing a twisted song to himself when he hears children. He gets up, looks around, and 2 boys run past in front of him. He yells for the guards to let them know there are people out of their cells in here. Then he sees them standing in front of his cell, and asks them who they are. He closes his eyes, and tells himself that he's going mad. He sees them closer when he opens his eyes, and backs off in terror. He yells at them, saying, "Be gone," and they disappear. He gets the knife that Blythe gave him and points it around. He hears them behind him, and turns around to look behind him. He sees the bodies of the kids looking at him, and he looks terrified. We see Henry waking up in the middle of the night, and he sees a beautiful blonde woman, his wife, with a newborn baby in her arms at the foot of the bed. He asks her why she doesn't leave him alone, and his wife tells him to beware. He hears noises from outside of the room. He calls Joan's name, but no one answers him. He sees a child who he thinks is his son, and runs downstairs after him. He sees the 2 kids standing in the corner of the room. The kids point to his right, and he turns there. He sees Bartholomew stabbing himself in his neck with Blythe's knife over and over again. Henry wakes up, gasping for air, and Joan knocks on his door, saying there's someone who wants to see him. Henry gets down and sees Blythe. She introduces herself and tells him that the Queen has requested his services. She tells him that the tale of his skills has traveled as far as to the Tower of London. Henry says he won't go there, and turns around to walk back up. Blythe gets up and tells him that the sons of the Queen are deceased and the culprit is roaming free. He is the key to solving this puzzle, and Henry turns back, yelling at her that he said no. Blythe tells him that the punishment for his disobedience is hanging, and Joan tells him to go with her. Blythe tells him to pack his things, and Henry goes up the stairs. Blythe gives money to Joan and gets out. She sees Henry looking at her from the stairs, and tells him that they are poor people. We see Richard and his man in front of Bartholomew's cell, looking at his body while talking. Richard finds the knife on the ground and gets out. We see Richard in King Edward's room, who's sick and lying on his bed. He wakes him up and they start talking. Richard tells him that his children are gone, and he refuses to show him Elizabeth. Richard sarcastically tells him that he's sorry for his loss, and gets out of the room after telling the guard to lock it. Blythe comes to the castle with Henry, and a guard stops them. He tells Blythe that Lord Richard wants to see her, but she tells him to wait, she has to speak to the Queen now. The guard says the Queen is not allowing visitors by the command of Lord Richard. Blythe says Richard is not the king, and the guard tells her that there has been an incident in the dungeon, she'll not be getting through until she meets him. Blythe turns to Henry, gives one of her earrings to him, and says she'll be right back. She gets inside of Richard's room and sits at the chair in front of his desk. She sees her knife on the desk, and they start talking. Richard tells her Bartholomew took his own life with her knife, and asks her why she gave her knife to him. Blythe says he was wrongly accused, and he told her that. Blythe tells him that she, too, doesn't like to be taken for a fool, and asks him if he thinks that he can just spread lies and expect everyone to follow him blindly, because she doesn't. She says she's still respected here, most importantly by the Queen. Richard gives her knife back to her, telling her to keep it with her for the next few days, because she will need it. Blythe says that she's not afraid of his threats, and Richard starts stabbing her with the knife. He eventually ends her. Then he looks at the blood on the blade and gets out of the room. We see Richard interrogating Henry in the torture chamber. He asks him what's his business there, and Henry tells him that the lady forced him to come here, she had him confused with another man. Henry says that she believes that there's a man who can speak with ghosts. He says again that they have the wrong man, and Richard asks Solomon to bring the girl. He brings her and ties her up. Richard gets the sack off of her head, and we see that it's Joan. Joan apologizes to Henry and says that they followed the lady, while we see the guards stabbing her dad. Richard asks her who Henry, while Solomon prepares a torture device to burn their skin. Henry shakes his head as no, but Solomon gets close to her with the torturing device, and she says he's the man they're looking for. She tells Richard how he made them talk with her mom in their house, and Henry says she's lying, no man can possess a power like that. Richard turns and asks Joan if she's lying. Joan begs him to let Henry go, and Richard tells Solomon to burn her. Joan starts screaming and asking for help from Henry. Henry yells them to stop and tells them he's the man they're looking for, he's the one who speaks with spirits. Richard says that's impossible and demands him to tell the truth. Henry says that he can see things that no other man can see, and he can hear them whisper to him their secret. Richard tells them to take him to the dungeon, and Henry asks what they'll do to Joan. Solomon asks Richard to leave her to him, and Richard allows him, telling him to ensure she's gone by the morning. Henry pulls Isaac over and tells him that Father Ainsworth sends his regards. Isaac looks shocked, and the guard takes Henry outside while Solomon burns Joan's face, and we hear her screams. We see Isaac coming to the dungeon the next morning to talk to Henry. He asks how he knows about Father Ainsworth, and Henry says he saw his body, tortured with head cuts all over it to the bones. Isaac doesn't believe him, and Henry says the woman he came with is deceased right now, he saw her. Isaac gets up, saying it's impossible, and leaves. He sees Jeffrey, looking sad and shaken. He tells him that Blythe is deceased. They say that she took her own life, and they won't let anyone see her body. Isaac tries to calm Jeffrey down, but he can't. Then we see Isaac having a nightmare. He gets out of his bed and we see him walking in the hallways. He sees Blythe's body in front of him, laughing. He asks her what she wants from him. She yells at him to help or join her, and he falls to the ground and hears her laugh again. We see Richard outside of the castle with his man, cremating Blythe's body. Then we see Isaac bringing food to Henry, and they make a deal. Henry gives him money to give to his mother and son, in return for him helping Isaac to talk to the princes and find the culprit. We see Isaac taking the money to his house. Then we see King Edward waking up in the night, and seeing the things move in his room. He looks around and sees one of his children next to him. He gets scared and tries to get away in the bed. He looks at the ground and sees mud traces. He follows them and throws his bed covers to where it ends. The covers gets hanged in the air and slowly gets pulled down. He sees the decayed bodies of his sons and tries to get away from them in the bed. The cover gets thrown back at him, and his sons disappear. We see Isaac talking with Henry's mother. She tells him that he wasn't always like this. He was a happy man once. His wife had a second baby after William, but she gave birth earlier than expected, and she was alone at the house. Henry found her in a pool of blood with their baby in her arms, both already gone. It was then when he first started to talk about seeing the spirits. She says she thought that he was so desperate to talk to his wife that something from the other side heard him and gave him this power. Then we see Jeffrey following him outside with a torch in his hand. Isaac starts digging up the graves of the princes, and he looks at him in shock. Isaac asks for his help, saying there's no time to explain it. Then we see Isaac opening the box and getting disgusted by the smell. He manages to pull himself together and takes the necklace off Prince Edward. Then we see them cleaning themselves and talking about Henry. Jeffrey acts jealous and tells Isaac that he's been running after Henry instead of talking or even thinking about him. Isaac tells him that they are dealing with dark things, and it's safer if he doesn't know anything about it. They argue more and Jeffrey leaves. Then we see Richard in front of the grave of the princes. He tells the guard to find whoever did this and send him away. We see Isaac in the dungeon, giving Henry the necklace. Henry turns the hourglass and changes the realm he's in. He finds the kids and tells them to hide. He gets under the bed with Prince Richard, while Prince Edward hides somewhere else. Someone with an axe comes into the room and finds Prince Edward. They see him getting attacked, and Henry closes Prince Richard's mouth. But the person drags the prince out and stabs him too. Henry gets out under the bed and sees Queen Elizabeth, and tells Isaac that it was her who did this to her own child. She attacks him with the axe, and he starts bleeding in both realms. Henry starts running away, and sees Richard in front of Elizabeth's room, asking her what she did. They talk, and Henry learns that they are together, and Elizabeth planned them all with him, and she's pregnant with his child. He tells all this to Isaac, and Isaac runs to tell this to King Edward while we see Henry coming back just in time. Isaac wakes up the king and tells him everything. Then they hear Richard clapping. Isaac argues with him and points Blythe's knife towards him. Then he tries to run away, but Richard catches him and throws him to the ground. Isaac tries to reach the knife, and Richard steps on his hand. Then he gets the knife and starts beating him. King Edward stops him from cutting Isaac's tongue, and Richard sees him out of bed, standing. He throws the knife to the side and goes to fight with him. He starts choking him while Isaac watches them, and he hits the king's head to the ground over and over again. He looks at Isaac and gets out. Isaac crawls towards the king, and Richard comes in, telling the guards that he did this to him, and he orders them to take him to the torture chamber. They get Isaac there and strip him down. He sees Jeffrey naked, tied to the ceiling from his feet, and Solomon next to him. Richard tells him that they will attest him as the one who took the princes, desecrated their graves in the worship of Satan, and had unnatural pleasures with his young lover, and he'll confess to all of these. Isaac refuses to do it, and they start torturing him while Jeffrey begs him to confess to it. Isaac keeps refusing, and Jeffrey says that they did it. He confesses to it, and asks them to let Isaac go. Richard goes to Jeffrey and cuts his body in half with a knife while Isaac screams. Richard goes back to him and asks if he's confessing to it, and Isaac keeps refusing again. He pushes Solomon to the side and starts torturing Isaac himself. Then we see a guard bringing Isaac into a dungeon and throwing him inside of a cell. Henry asks what they have done to him, and Isaac says everyone around him died and he's waiting to get executed. He begs Henry to cast his beacon and call all the beings of the other side. Henry says there are dangerous things out there. He wouldn't only call the spirits. Isaac convinces him to do it, and Henry turns the hourglass. Isaac tells him when the time was about to run out, and Henry calls all the spirits. A light comes out behind him, and we see hands trying to reach him through the cell. Richard hears a sound around him and gets scared. The light slowly fades away, and Isaac sees a red light with the devil inside. Isaac tells him that he's ready to abandon his life, and the devil reaches into the cell with its claws and takes his life, while we see Isaac laughing like crazy. Richard gets into his brother's room and sees that he's alive once more. He tries to get out but finds the door locked. He gets the axe from the wall and tries to break the door, while things start to catch fire and King Edward starts laughing. He manages to get out and runs to Queen Elizabeth's room. He opens the door and sees the princess on top of her, eating her organs. He closes the door again and we see Henry awake, running through the hallways. Richard sees Isaac as a demon when he turns around, and he slowly starts walking towards him. Isaac tells him to have faith and stabs his throat with the cross on his hand. Henry sees Richard with blood coming out of his mouth. Isaac rips out Richard's jaw and Richard falls to the ground. Henry starts running away and we see him in a boat, getting away from the Tower of London. He goes to his own house and hugs William. Then he sees the hourglass on the table, and we see his body inside of the cell in the dungeon. We see smoke rising from where Isaac's body used to be, and we see his demon form walking away. We see the hourglass with the sands at the bottom, and the movie ends there.